Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chai Talk with Wajat Lee for the Left Hook Substack, where I invite a subject matter expert who is far smarter than me to break down one or more than one big question or questions in 30 minutes or less. And today, I have author and investigative journalist Katherine Stewart, who has a fantastic new book that just came out last week. I even have a copy. I read it, Money, Lies, and God, Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy, a fantastic book, chock filled with research, terrifying research about what I would say the cabal, the nexus of money and power, intent on literally destroying our democracy. And the big question that I have then for you is, what is this movement and what is their end goal? Katherine, and you have your book is about that, but I want to tease it out. And before we get into the who, because you really get into the who, you say something in your book which I think is very important. You say out front, these folks aren't misinformed. These folks aren't gullible. These folks don't have economic anxiety. These folks are intentional. They're deliberate. And this type of cabal, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, which I named them, that you talk about, this industry has a very intentional end goal. Can you unpack that first?
Sure. Well, I think first it's really important to divide this movement between the leadership and the rank and file.
Mm,
It's really the leaders who are sort of orchestrating the movement. Their aims are explicitly anti-democratic. They've been talking for years about how they think democracy is unworkable, it's a heresy, and they want to sort of smash the administrative state, which is sort of what they sort of repeat, what we see playing out before our eyes. The funders of the movement want to, well, before I get into that, I want to talk about how I divide the movement into five categories in order
yes.
to kind of help people understand how these different cohorts are working together, and also how some of them have different, I would say, interests and aims. So I divide the movement into five categories. There are the funders of the movement. The movement is as strong as it is because we've had 5 decades of investment by a sector of America's ultra-rich people, the billionaires, not all of them, of course, but a sector of them are investing their fortunes in the destruction of democracy. Then we
Mm,
have thinkers, the sort of intellectuals of the movement, the sergeants who are the sort of hyper-political pastors, the infantry, the rank and file, who are sort of manipulated to vote a certain way. And some of them are more aware of the agenda or more on board with the agenda than others. And then, of course, the power players, who are the sort of key activists and strategists. And I point out that what the funders really want is not what is in the interests of the rank and file are pursuing with their vote. So it helps to understand these categories because we need to understand the movement is not monolithic. The different constituencies can be at odds with one another, but they can also egg each other on in cycles of mutual exploitation. So, the funders and the thinkers and, all the leaders, the leadership cadre want power. They want policies that privilege their views, certainly on the theocratic side. I would say some of them are more about sort of have more theocratic and authoritarian aims, and others just simply want power and money for themselves. And then, of course, they use a lot of their money to provoke the insecurities of the rank and file. And the rank and file can be persuaded to vote on, a certain way because of the culture war issues they're focused on, and because they've persuaded people who, many of whom have legitimate resentments about wealth inequality, but they don't see it that way. If you can distract them with these culture war issues, they give
mm.
them like an enemy to hate and to blame for all their problems. So I
Yeah.
hope that's
No,
helpful.
it was very helpful. I was gonna get into that, but you already did. And it reminded me, about 13, 14 years ago, with the Center for American Progress, I did this investigative report called Fear Incorporated: The Roots of the Islamophobia Network in America. And very similar to Money, Lies, and God, it was about basically mapping out what this ecosystem was like, who was spreading, manufacturing, and promoting these very deliberate, intentional anti-Muslim memes to attack Obama, and then also to Trojan horse, anti-immigrant sentiment. And the way I broke it down was, number one, the funders; number two, the nerve center, the thinkers; number three, the grassroots movements, which were oftentimes mega churches; Number four, the media megaphone. And number five, the political players, because all these talking points ended up in the mouths of the politicians. So I was reading this and I'm like, Catherine has her own type of like, FBI board of like, here are the capos and here is the kingpin, right? But before we get into that, because I want to get in the names and in detail who's actually a part of it, you say something in your book, which I highlighted, is that they are driven by a reactionary nihilism. Can you unpack that?
Sure. I mean, I think of reactionary, the term, well, let's start with the term nihilism. I really think that nihilists are people who, by, I would say, their actions more than any words, imply that there's no real truth. That truth is just can be a casualty of war, and there's no real, that the world as it exists is devoid of real meaning. And I think of people and many of the movement, sort of, you dig into their ideologies, they're very nihilistic.
Mm,
They're always hearkening back to a sort of imaginary version of the American past that never actually existed. And the reactionary part is that they're sort of longing for supposed days of yore. They're nothing more than a figment of their imagination, but that also includes elements of a regressive order, hierarchies of men over women, white people over people of color, etc. And they, imply that, the America that exists, the truly diverse America with diverse religions and racial identities and ethnicities and sexual orientations, is somehow so bad and so broken.
mm.
Like the values of pluralism and equality are so terrible that we just need to smash it all up. And they claim that they're going to create something beautiful that can never actually exist in the way they think it does. I mean, this is a very anti-democratic idea. It is sort of opposed to the values of pluralism and equality, justice, and the rule of law that represent the best of the American promise.
And in the book, you mentioned, right, like this fear of modernism, this loathing of modernism, right? You mentioned in the book that instead of this vision being driven by any semblance of hope, I believe the two words you used were fear and grievance is the main driving factor of this very diverse coalition that nonetheless is coming together and finding shared common goals. And I want to go from down to up. Usually people start money, lies, and God. Let's go from God first. And I see the other book that you wrote, The Power Worshippers, which is a fantastic book. You mentioned that in this diverse coalition, not everyone is religious, right? There are some atheist billionaires there. There are people who are concerned about the birth rate. We'll get into that. But let's talk about the Christian nationalist aspect of it, the grievance, the victimhood, this fear of modernity. And before you kind of unpack the Christian nationalist players in this movement, can you define it for us?
Or Christian nationalism is an anti-democratic political ideology, and it's also a movement. So I think of it as a mindset and a machine. The mindset says that America was founded to be a conservative Christian nation. Our laws should be based on a reactionary interpretation of the Bible. And we once were great because of this, and we need to somehow get back to that. But it's an exclusionary form of nationalism. It's an idea of who gets to properly belong in the country and who doesn't. It sort of divides the people into the true Americans and then, of course, the others or the outsiders, or those who don't really deserve all their rights. It's the idea that a certain kind of people have a right to rule and others have a duty to submit. And the machine of Christian nationalism, the movement of Christian nationalism is, again, both leadership driven and organization driven. It's as strong as it is because funders over 5 decades, 5+ decades, have invested billions of dollars in the infrastructure, the deep organizational infrastructure of this movement. And you can divide the different organizations into categories. You have right-wing policy groups, you have legal advocacy groups, you have networking operations that get different sectors of the leadership on the same page because they know without unity, there's no victory. You've got very sophisticated data initiatives. You've got, I think, a very underappreciated sector of the movement are these pastor networks where movement leaders draw pastors into groups like Watchmen on the Wall or Faith Wins. They even have Church United, the Courage Tour. They have other initiatives that draw people in who are focused on different sort of subgroups, like Latino pastor groups or Black pastor groups.
Can I ask you, Catherine, if you know, and because in the book you gave a great example, and just for the person at home who it's hard to connect the dots, let's just take Christian nationalism and exactly what you said. Use your framework, right, of funders, thinkers, sergeants, infantry, and power players. Can you just draw me a line of one player from each? So let's just say, like the heir to the Pepsi that you mentioned in your book, the heir to the Pepsi fortune.
Right. She's a funder. She's funding the operation called Faith Wins, which draws political pastors, I'm sorry, conservative pastors into networks. And then there are people like David Barton, who is, I would actually kind of describe him as a cross between a thinker and also a sergeant. He's like, or a power player, I should say. He's a sort of fake historian who came up with this myth of America as a supposedly conservative Christian nation and all of our funders were Bible thumpers, which is not true. But he speaks to these pastors at these gatherings in churches all around the country. And listen, movement leaders know if you can get the pastors on your side, you can get their congregations because pastors are the most trusted voices in their communities. And so these folks like David Barton, and we'll get into some of the other folks who are doing presentations at Faith Wins gatherings, they get movement leaders like David Barton and Chad Connolly, who is a sort of networking operator and also kind of, I would say, call him a power player of the movement, and bring them together with some of the sergeants who are the sort of smaller but very political pastors. They get them together and they say, you got to get your congregations to vote your biblical values because we're facing an apocalypse and America's on the, going to fall under the thumb of Satan. And then they give these pastors incredibly sophisticated and robust tools for turning out their congregations to vote. So you've got the funder who is funding the whole thing, the operation. You've got the presenters who are traveling from church to church. And each church, by the way, gathers dozens of pastors, in some instances, like hundreds of pastors in the region. And they do these presentations. So you've got a combination of the players and the thinkers during the presentations. Then you've got the sergeants who become, they become these very political pastors, and they give all these tools to their congregations, and they say, really sophisticated tools, not just voter guides, not just videos to air at church, not just QR codes that have a sort of suite of tools, but also data tools. So a pastor can look up like who voted in the last election. You can imagine how those kinds of conversations. Mrs. Jones, I see you didn't vote in the last election. Don't you know it's your biblical duty? We need to vote our biblical values. And here's a voter guide showing you where our biblical values sort of shake out. So, the movement, I would say the folks who are on board with this movement, like fully on board, are a minority of this country, but they punch above their political weight because the movement turns them out to vote in disproportionate numbers. And we know very well it doesn't take a majority to win elections in a country where 40% of people don't bother to vote, and an additional number have their votes essentially downgraded or stolen from them because of race-based gerrymandering and voter suppression tactics. Again, it doesn't take a majority to win. All it takes is a really disproportionately motivated minority.
Yeah, it's exactly what I researched in Fear Incorporated, is that over a period of 10 years, it was about $43 million from 7 major funders that went into the network, which was very, in my words, incestuous and tight, that helped each other, and then had penetrated inside the Republican Party, which then allowed fringe memes, lies, half-baked truths to now then become mainstream and you get on TV, had congressional hearings, and voila, it motivated voters to come out and tilt elections in midterm elections and in presidential elections. And speaking about it, doesn't take that much, except a little bit of money, a little bit of gumption, focus, long-term plans. Elon Musk gave $290 million to Donald Trump. And Steve Bannon, before he turned on Musk, openly said that without Musk, Trump wouldn't have become president. we don't really see Musk as the most religious person, but in your book, you mentioned that this consortium of individuals who are attacking our democracy, not all of them are Christian nationalists, not all of them believe in God. Talk to us about the broligarchy and how they have become part and parcel of this movement against our, literally our democracy and our freedoms.
Yes, as I mentioned, as I discuss in the book, some of the movement funders are evangelical, some are Catholic, some are various types of Protestant, some are Jewish, some are not religious at all, but they're all sort of in agreement that they want the economic policies. Most of them are motivated, I would say, more by economic policies that are going to justify and increase their massive concentrations of wealth. Some are more religious than others. We can't know what's in people's hearts, of course, but they're all kind of, I would say, swimming in the same headwaters, and they're all sort of in agreement on certain things. The way to get those economic policies for the ones who aren't particularly motivated by religion or the culture wars is to get, through Christian nationalism, which is I would say, the most important ideological framework for the largest part of this movement, because that's what motivates the rank and file. If you can get people to vote on a single issue or two or three issues, you can control their vote. And
Trans.
right, exactly. It's like the new.
$200 million spent on anti-trans ads in 2024.
It's really extraordinary because this isn't, we're facing a lot of issues in our country. We over the last decades, we've had these massive concentrations of wealth at the tippy top of our country. And that's actually making it so much harder for many Americans to live lives of dignity and to provide for their families. And yet, if you can get people focused on something over here that has to do with sexuality, of course, which distracts everybody, it's like that laser pointer cat toy, right? It's an identity issue. So, the way I do a lot of my research is I go to right-wing strategy gatherings and summits and conferences. And in December, I was at America Fest. America Fest. It was put on by Turning Point USA,
Yeah.
20,000 hardcore MAGA supporters at the Phoenix Convention Center. And almost every single speaker mentioned something about the issue of trans women
Yep.
playing on women's sports teams. Is this the greatest issue facing our country? Is this the most consequential issue? Is this the issue that's shuttering your factories or raising the price of goods or interfering with your health care, your voting rights, or your right to live with dignity? Of course not. But if you get people focused on these issues that have to do with sexuality, I mean, it's the othering that really matters. And if one other falls out, well, they'll always find another to take its place, whether it's sexual minorities, whether it's religious minorities, well, whether it's racial minorities, they're always going to find, an other. That's really important for autocratic movements worldwide. I mean, this is a dynamic that's not remotely unique to America. When autocrats want to consolidate their power, they'll divide their populations, and they
Mhm.
often do it through scapegoating. We've seen this over the world and throughout history.
And I think that example, it just literally is the best example for money lies in God. $200 million to spread the lie of, LGBTQ, especially trans people, and wokeness, and the way they've misidentified DEI and CRT, taking over your kids. That's the lie that they funneled through social media, mainstream media, like you said, these conferences, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, the Super Bowl ads, and then you tie in faith and this type of concept of order. Men are men, women are women, and you talk about that masculinity aspect of it, and you win over a bunch of folks. I do want to ask you about this because you do mention how this traditional gender role plays a key aspect of kind of influencing the infantry, right? Men are men. Make men men again. Can you talk to us about the misogyny and the patriarchy that are part and parcel of this movement?
Yes, it's really important because this is something that autocratic leaders do. It's not particularly logical, but it happens. They need to channel their aggression. They need to focus the rage of their constituents on external objects. And they often choose like this idea of the gender order. Anybody who violates it is an object of their wrath because um, it's a way of channeling the aggression of the rank and file. I mean, If you look around the world at autocrats, they often insist on the subordination of women and valorize a sort of manly masculinity. And one of the reasons is because they're actually advocating for an extreme imbalance of power, economically and or politically. And listen, in countries where there's a lot of economic inequality, a lot of men are actually struggling to achieve dignity. They're really worried about their own prospects of being able to sort of provide for themselves, and they're being asked to subsume their identity. They're being asked to live in a country with no free speech, no right to political opposition, and dangling a subordinate woman in front of them is almost a way of buying them off,
Mm.
saying, well, I mean, I have friends from countries where that have extreme gender hierarchies. And one of my friends said, my dad couldn't, speak freely. His daily life was pretty prescribed what he was and wasn't allowed to do. But he was so busy controlling his wife and children and feeling sort of puffed up because of that, that he really didn't even notice that he didn't have the right to speak freely, to endorse any kind of political opposition or advocate for a better life for himself and people like him. So, the gender order is not just about subsuming the rights of women. It is also about providing a kind of reward in a way for men who have to subsume their own rights.
And you move in the ranks. You're the manly man. You're the masculine man. Obviously, this is very toxic. And I want to get back to the alleged masculine man who is against the trans and wants the right order. Eugenics and this desire to repopulate the earth with a certain type of babies. You mentioned that movement as well, and I'm glad you do, because this pro-natalist movement, I've been following them for a while. I've been trying to talk about, like, listen, okay, in the EU, United States, Japan, China, falling birth rates. Instead of being a eugenicist, maybe give women more rights, maybe give people more education, be pro-immigrant, give seniors, more work, and then maybe that will influence people to, I don't know, have kids, maybe progressive pronatal policies. They're not into that. They're into a completely different mindset. And Elon Musk is part of it. Can you talk about that fascinating aspect of this cabal that most people don't talk about? Because I don't think people really, they're not masochists like you and me, Catherine. They don't go deep into the ideology, but talk about like how that's part of this whole ideology of order, the right type of people, populating America, the right type of babies, and how Elon is a big driver of this.
The right type of babies is really key here. But I think it also ties into this misogyny. It's this idea that women have a role, and that is being at home and raising babies. And we've even seen attacks, pretty open attacks on women's right to vote from people like the sponsors of the SAVE Act, which, as you know, was reintroduced into the, I believe, House of Representatives and may be stalled now, but has a lot of support from a number of Republicans. This idea that, they say it's to interfere with voting fraud, but what it would do is put anybody who doesn't have a birth certificate that matches the name that they're using now, you can't vote unless you have like a passport. Well, millions and millions of Americans don't have passports, but also US women who change their names when they get married are then going to be sort of out. And you'd think, well, oh, well, we want married women to vote. Of course, we don't want to disenfranchise them. They can use their marriage certificates. No, you can't use your marriage certificate to prove that the name that you are legally have now is different on your birth certificate. So the SAVE Act would actually throw millions of American women off the voter rolls. And there are other efforts to interfere with women's right to vote. We're starting to hear voices talk about, they call it head of household voting, where the head of the household, presumably a man, has the right to control the vote of other members of the household.
Wow.
And then you have people like Doug Wilson, who's, I would say, his profile within the movement is on the rise. Pete Hegseth praises him and has attended a church that is linked to Doug Wilson's religious empire. And Wilson and other voices in this movement they call them theobros. Some of them are talking about how women's right to vote is a mistake and shouldn't have happened. So you're starting to hear, I mean, when we talk about misogyny, I just want to go back that for a minute. It's complicated. And I spoke about one aspect of it. There are other aspects to it as well. But we're starting to hear really open attacks on, anything that deviates from the supposedly correct gender order. And natalism is a part of that. It's also part of a kind of eugenics project, as you mentioned earlier. So they say they want more babies, but it's clear they just want the right kind of babies. And it actually reminds me, there was a big eugenics movement back when a lot of Catholics started immigrating to America. And a lot of the early anti-abortion voices, people like there was a doctor named Storer. He was in Boston. And he articulated a hostility to abortion precisely because he said, all these Catholic women are having babies. And he said, I wish I had the quote in front of me. It's so funny. It's like, the Protestant women, the fate of the nation rests in your loins. Basically saying, you're going to let them outbreed you. And then, of course, along with that came a kind of women can't be educated because it ruins their brains and stuff like that. So this is not new in our country. But
No, but it's part and parcel,
coming
and
up now.
I appreciate you spending time on it because people don't connect the dots. They often miss the fact that strict, I don't even want to say traditional, but strict regressive gender roles and sexuality roles are part and parcel of this type of romanticized image they have of a perfect future. And
Exactly.
eugenics, Nazi science, let's just be honest about it, is part and parcel of it as well. This fear of modernity, this fear of anyone who's the other, the desire for power by any means necessary. And I have two quick questions for you before you go. You mentioned in your book that when you actually asked a lot of the infantry, right? What do you really want? Beyond some like hallmark vague notion of like freedom and end tyranny, there's not much there that even they don't know. Like there's no concrete pathway to their romanticized vision of the future. They're just like freedom, own the libs, and then what else? How will you get there? Just once we own the libs, it'll be fine. Can you talk to us about that? There's really not much there beyond the fear and grievance. There's no hope there.
Well, I wouldn't say that is entirely true. I think, a lot of them have been really manipulated, and they've been manipulated by the sort of mindsets. I would say there are four elements to the mindset
Yeah.
of the movement and the way that it connects to the rank and file. The first element is identity top politics. This idea that there's an us and a them. They like the feeling that they're proper, true Americans and they represent the founders' America. And the movement leaders are actually quite good at conveying this sense of positive identification with being the righteous. We're the righteous, and they, the others, are demonic and satanic. There's a lot of demon talk over there. Second element is that they're being persecuted. There's these folks are being
Victims.
told all day long they're victims. There's no more persecuted group in America than conservative white Christians. And of course, they've been told that America's on the edge of this catastrophe. If we let the woke liberals and the others take over, we're all going under the thumb of Satan, and it's going to be the Illuminati for hundreds of years, which is literally a quote that I heard. And then finally, movement leaders that they say, well, this sort of it primes them, it clears the way for their um, acceptance of an authoritarian who's going to break the rules and seize
Mm,
the reins of power and scrap the rule of law in favor of the iron fist. And so it's basically the exploitation of identity politics, the exploitation of religion for politics and power. You know, I, I, I'm a reporter and I meet a lot of folks who are rank and file. Some of them I like a lot, and some of them
yeah.
I really think are kind of have some bad ideas. But, a great number of them, they seem like they love their families, they truly care about their communities, and they truly are persuaded they're doing what's best for America. They see themselves as genuinely patriotic, and they really think they're helping to save America from like an unspeakable evil. Unfortunately, all of their good intentions are being harnessed in service of an agenda that is gonna not just destroy our democracy, but probably make life a lot worse for them and also a lot worse for everyone else.
Well, we just saw yesterday the House passed its budget, $4.5 trillion tax cuts for the 1%, but the expense of Medicaid and food stamps. And who's that going to hurt? We know who it's going to hurt. Their base, literally. We're
Yeah.
going to find out in a long way. Final question I have for you, Catherine. People could be hearing this and they're like, listen, I don't have that type of money. I don't have that type of long-term agenda. I don't have a 40-year plan. I don't have these groups. I've always said that a dedicated, zealous minority can cut through the majority like a hot knife through butter, right? We've seen it time and time again. But we have the majority and we have the numbers. Like you said, this is not most people. What can most people do to resist this?
Oh, there is so much. I mean, the first step is get out of bed. This is no time to get under the covers. This is a time for moral courage. And when you get involved in a pro-democracy movement, there is nothing more meaningful or impactful. And it also reduces any sort of stress you might be feeling about the state of the world. Local activism really matters. I mean, when we step aside and think someone else is going to take care of what's happening on a local school board or town meeting, guess who shows up? It's the Moms for Liberty with their fake hysteria about CRT and all that other nonsense. So it's really important to be involved in your community, to know what's going on, to support politicians who support democracy, to support with your either money or if you don't have it, with a bit of your volunteer effort to support, find like democracy supporting organizations that are out there. There are a lot of them, and a lot of them are really doing excellent work and need your support. I think we can do a lot more with less money because number one, we're on the side of democracy. We have the Constitution working for us as much as they try to distort the meaning of the Constitution and break the laws. We actually have the law and the Constitution on our side. I think we also need to build a big tent. We're
Yeah.
not all going to agree about everything. We got to stop purity testing one another. It's interesting because in the last few years, I've started hearing something on the right. The right is so divided, by the way, and I get
Yep.
into a lot of those divisions that can be exploited in my book, Money, Lies, and God. But I started hearing, like a sign of their divisions is I started hearing speakers say things like, they would paraphrase Ronald Reagan and they say, the person who agrees with you 80% of the time is your 80% friend, not your 20% enemy. And the same is true for us. We're not all going to agree on the same things. We're all going to have some differences in terms of policy, but we can agree on more than we can disagree on. We can work together to help form a more perfect union. I mean, so those are just a few things. I have more specific recommendations in detail at
In
the
the
end
book.
of Money, Lies, and God. Yeah.
It's breaking news since I have you for 1 minute. The Supreme Court seems poised to lower bar for white people to sue for job bias. A majority of justices appear to
Gosh.
support making it easier for men, white people, and straight people to sue for job discrimination. They heard oral arguments in the case of an Ohio woman who claims she faced anti-straight bias in the workplace and who is challenging past rulings that set a higher bar for providing discrimination against members of non-minority groups. Your hot take.
I have the world's smallest violin in my fingertips.
Literally everything you just said, like people are like, I don't know what Catherine is saying seems a little nutty, and the universe
Well,
decided to give you this.
they are actually preparing, well, to declare a total war on anti-discrimination law.
Yeah.
And we're seeing it in some of their picks where they, demote like some four-star general with some really fantastic credentials and then put somebody in their place who's a friend of Jared Kushner who's got lesser credentials. I mean, we know that a lot of this sort of anti-DEI stuff is really DEI for conservative white men
Yep.
or conservative.
White supremacy, hard to take out. Very violent, very ignorant, but ultimately very self-destructive.
I mean,
Catherine,
they cast in terms of merit, but it's really not about merit in the way that you look that in the way that it's being implemented at all.
if you think it's about merit, I give you Pete Hegseth, and I give you Kash Patel, and I give you RFK, and I give you Donald Trump, folks. Catherine, the book is fantastic. It's called Money, Lies, and God: Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy. Please shamelessly promote yourself. How can people support you, find you, read you?
I have a website. It's katherinestewart.me. I'm on Blue Sky at Katherine Stewart. Blue Sky. I'm on Twitter at Kath S. Stewart. There are two S's there. And thank you so much for having me on your show. It's really great to speak with you.
No, I loved it. Everyone, stay safe, stay kind, help each other, be active in your community. There is a way out. There's more of us than there are of them. And please, don't be a fascist. Take care.